All right, I want to talk about the Oblivion Remaster and the balance problems that were introduced with the remaster. So there was already some balance problems with classic Oblivion, but I really want to focus on the ones that the remaster made worse. So first, physical damage is incredibly low for a variety of reasons, and it's got a very low ceiling because Fortify Fatigue no longer buffs your damage. Weapon attack speeds were cut in half, but damage was unchanged. The perks are bad. Weapons are slow, so they level slowly. So it's not just that they're slow, so they do low DPS, but they also level slowly because things level by use in this game. And there's a lot of noob-friendly changes that remove depth, but lowered the ceiling as well. Magic skills, however, kind of got the opposite treatment. They were already overpowered in Classic Oblivion, but now they level stupidly fast. You don't need to train them, especially at the ending. I did a 3-hour stream recently where my destruction within the first 90 minutes had gone from 84 to 100, just from natural play. But my blade, while starting at 47, over the entire 3-hour stream, only got to 52. So 47 to 52, 5 blade skill versus the last 16 destruction skill. And remember, I said destruction, we got there in half the time I became a master, 100, where the entire 3 hours I only got to 52 with blade. And it's not like you can watch, it's not like I'm not hitting him with my blade. The enchant ran out, so I hit him this guy a few extra times, where normally I just cast some weakness spells, but I finished them with my blade weapon. It just levels so much slower. And I'll show that more later too. Alchemy, which was already incredible, received massive buffs, and weakness spells weren't touched at all. They're still crazy powerful. And last, the main problem for this balance is that, well, Adept is super easy. And so none of the big YouTubers will complain about physical damage being low because they're just going to play on Adept and you can still kill things in the game on Adept as long as you pick Blade as a major skill and put points into Strength and upgrade your weapon from time to time. You'll never run into real trouble and have to interact with any of the systems in a meaningful way. Adept is very, very easy. To show that Adept is too easy, I'm going to unequip all this guy's gear. It's just, he's got 100 strength and 100 blade skill and a decent weapon. I mean, it's doing 30 damage. This is it's slightly better than a Daedric weapon, but it's nothing special. And I am level 30, and we're going to create a Zivali at level 30. And on Adept, he can hit me, but I can kill him before he can do much. And honestly, I could make 2 of them just be surrounded, and it's still pretty easy to take him down. I don't have to really block. I don't have to dodge. 2 Zivali at once, and I'm not wearing any equipment. This is Adept. It's just not very difficult. If I threw on the Mundane Ring and all of my armor, obviously this would be much easier, and I wouldn't be taking any damage. So all I have to do is equip the armor and get magic resist, and the game's over. So Adept is too easy. Not only was enemy health and damage reduced, player health was increased due to retroactive endurance, and now I think this was a good change, but it did increase player health. And Virtues now cause the player to always effortlessly gain high attributes. You get +4 to 3 attributes. And if you've watched me before, you know I defended the old Oblivion leveling system. I only ever gained about +3 to my attributes on level up, so I got +9 instead of +12. So if you've never played Classic Oblivion, I got 9 virtues instead of 12 because of the way I played the game. And people could optimize to get 15 virtues every level, but that wasn't very typical, and it wasn't easy to do, and it took a lot of grinding. So it wasn't a fun way to play, and attributes just aren't that valuable, so a better way to play was to just accept your maybe 8 or 9 virtues per level. And some levels early on were easier to get. You could get 12 or 13, but I'll talk more about that later. We're going to talk about physical damage in the weapons. In Classic, fortifying your fatigue could increase your maximum damage. You could do more damage than was possible in the remaster. Now let me show you something. In a video that I made back in February, I showed that on max difficulty in Classic Oblivion, using Fortify Fatigue, I could one-shot pretty much any enemy. And this is on a high-level character, and if you see here, I one-shot this Gremite. Now that the remaster is out, this video doesn't apply. It just doesn't work. Nothing functions this way anymore. And this was kind of cheesing the system, obviously because I'm one-shotting enemies, even without stealth damage at level 30 on max level. Now, that's kind of ridiculous. But they simply completely removed this system, and so now fatigue can no longer buff your damage. I'll show you the spreadsheet as well. So the damage formula had your base weapon damage, and then strength gave you a multiplier that went from 0.75 all the way up to 1.25. That's the same so far in the remaster and classic. Your weapon skill goes from 0 to 100, and the multiplier as well goes from 0.2 all the way up to 1.7. And your weapon durability, that multiplier kind of changed. At 100 health at 0.5, you could upgrade it with a high armorer perk and improve your damage, or as it went down to 0, you would do less damage. And then your fatigue, this was a percentage of your fatigue. If I have 400 fatigue, for example, and I fortified it to 500, well, I would have 500 out of 400 fatigue, which is 125. Oops, well, we'll change that to a percent by multiplying it by 100. So it's 125%, meaning it would gain me a 12.5% damage increase multiplier. So I could gain unlimited damage by repeatedly fortifying my fatigue. Very difficult to do, but you could get up to like 300, 400% fatigue, getting to very high damage multipliers where I'm power attacking for 200 damage. Now, I would consider it an exploit when you lower your max fatigue to 1. That's what I was doing in that video, and so I could get this percentage up to like 50,000 and do 8,000 damage with a single arrow shot. It was pretty ridiculous. I'm okay that the system isn't exactly the same, but instead of fixing it, they just simply removed it. So if you notice, I hit the zombie and he slides a little bit backwards, right? And it's pretty decently far. Even as I use some of my fatigue, I knock him back pretty far because I have pretty high damage on this character. And while he's going downhill. If I was trying to knock him uphill, it would actually be a little bit worse and not quite as effective, and he could get to me. So using the hill to your advantage works a lot in Classic. And if I want to, I can use some spells to fortify my fatigue. So that's really what I wanted to show here. I even have some on my soul trap. And then I could drink some potions. What's a good one? This one fortifies my fatigue and restores it. That's not the best potion I could drink. But with all that going, I have 1,000 fatigue. And now I knock him back even farther. And that knockback is part of my damage. As you do more damage, you knock enemies farther back in Classic. And you stagger them more. Okay, if I let some of this fatigue wear out and I switch to a slightly weaker weapon, you can see now the knockback isn't nearly as far. It's still decent because I'm going downhill, but not compared to my two-handed weapon there. So this is the new formula. And actually, it's even more simple than this. Losing weapon durability doesn't reduce your damage anymore. My formula is wrong. If your weapon durability is above 100, you gain 12.5% damage. If it's at 0, you lose 50% damage. That's it. So this durability formula, this weapon durability, isn't accurate. It doesn't actually make you lose damage. 1 to 100 are all 0.5, and 101 to 125 are all this multiplier, that 12.5% increase. If I was using the bound sword, for example, my displayed damage would be 35 because it rounds up to 35 even at 101 weapon durability. So it wouldn't go down gradually. And then the other portion would be 31 if I didn't over repair my weapon. Even when I'm down to 1 durability, it would still say 31 until it finally breaks, and then it would display 15. They simplified weapon durability and they simplified fatigue. And I think the reason is that a lot of players, especially new players, would always fight at 0 fatigue. And they would not repair their gear. So maybe their weapon is at 70% durability. So even late game, they would only be doing 13 damage. And early game, this was pretty devastating. If you didn't have max strength, maybe you only had 40 blade, I'm only doing 2 damage with this build. And so a good player might repair their weapon and make sure they have 100% fatigue, and they're doing 5 damage early game, which is 2.5 times damage, which is a big difference. Obviously, it's a big difference. And late game, 2.5 times is more visible. 33 damage is very different than 12.6. It's very noticeable. You will feel it. Things will be much grindier if you're not optimizing your fatigue and your weapon durability in the classic game. That's, again, removed to simplify the game for noobs in the remaster. Weapon speed was cut in half, so your DPS is lower. In Classic, for example, a Daedric Dagger could do 26.6 DPS based on its, simply just looking at its base damage and its speed. Now, technically, it'd be even higher than this at max stats, but it'd be about the same. Where in the remaster, using those same stats, its base damage didn't change, but its attacks much slower. Its speed went from 1.4 to 0.75, and so the DPS is much lower. The drop is even worse for two-handed weapons. Claymores went from 0.8 attack speed to 0.32, and if you've ever used a Claymore in the remaster, you will notice they are very, very slow. The DPS got cut in more than half. It's down to 40%. It's a 60% reduction. It's terrible. It actually sucks to use a Claymore now. They stink. In Classic, Classic daggers did do the most CPS, but their short reach and low knockback meant you were getting hit too, because you had to be right up in their face, where the claymores had long reach and you didn't always have to get hit due to that high knockback. All right, next we got to talk about the perks. Blade, the perks are 15% weakness for 5 seconds. It sucks. That's 2 damage if you're using a glass longsword with 100 strength. It's terrible. It's not, even when we're looking at max damage here, going from 34.6 to 39.8, and this is a 50 skill perk. We're talking about mid-game, going from 13 to 15. That's where I got the 2 damage from. Like, what the heck? This is after you do a power attack, and you're probably not even over repairing your gear. So you have to do this power attack first, 29.6, and then it applies the weakness for 5 seconds. It's absolute garbage. The first attack doesn't even get the bonus. It's not until 100 skill that you get up to 30, which is okay, but it's still not great. You would want at 100 skill with a great weapon to be one-shotting enemies. This is when you should be doing a boatload of damage, not I have to do this 83 damage power attack. Now my next attacks will do a bonus 10 damage. It's something, but it's just not enough because the damage is so low. I would rather just use a rusty iron dagger and have it stack weakness effects. To show what I mean, I made 2 rusty iron daggers. So notice they says 0 damage. That's because I set my blade skill to 0 and my strength to 30. So if I completely ignore physical damage, well, I'm going to use this soul trap 1 second, 38 shock damage. Without the soul trap, I could get up to 39 damage. And the spell I'm using only costs 22 magicka at 100 skill. It's because it's just 100% weakness for 6 seconds. I could probably do it at 5 seconds too, and I'll show you that. So we're going to make, we'll quick save it here. I will make a Zivalai. He's right there, and I can do get AV health, make sure he's got his 212. It looks like it's working normally. I will cast my weakness spell on him and hit him and not the clan fear. And I 2-shot him. That's with the soul trap. I don't have anything in my inventory. So even a rusty iron dagger that's doing 0 damage, just with that enchantment, is more effective than the best physical character I could create. And all this character needs to do this is a single grand soul gem with other soul gems like Azure Star to recharge it. And destruction skill is just so much easier to raise. But we'll talk more about that later. All right, next we're going to talk about why blunt perks are really dumb. The silence is cool, but shield, it gives me 0 damage, 0 crowd control, and for many builds it's worthless, even like mid to late game. And I don't usually make the late game argument, but this is a master perk, the 100 blunt skill perk. You don't get it until late game. So I think whoever thought of this honestly should just be fired. It's a very dumb idea. It's very basic. Like, oh, I use blunt weapons, I should get a shield. This is like MMO thinking. Someone who's making World of Warcraft talents for like the hero trees or whatever I'm talking about could come up with this. It's not interesting. Do better. So I already kind of talked about the noob-friendly changes to Armorer, and again, in Classic, every noob attack with 0 fatigue, so they're doing half damage, and they forgot to repair their gear. So not only are noobs dealing double damage due to fatigue changes, but they're dealing extra damage due to repair changes. I only watched a little bit of Asmongold streaming this game, and he never repaired his gear, and he never had the fatigue, because it didn't matter. He didn't need to think about those things. He's playing on Adept. The remaster took out those systems, but now those systems also can't help you improve your character. So you're just kind of stuck being a noob. Everyone's a noob now. All right, next we got to talk about magic. First, the skills level stupidly fast. We just look at the graph. I can show the tables again. The base cost, if I have a spell that has a base cost of 399, it's giving me 53 experience per cast. Swinging with your blade weapon gives you 0.6 experience per hit. Any weapon, whether it's a dagger or a claymore. It's almost 90 times as much experience per cast. That's why your destruction can go from 75 to 100 in a single playthrough, and blade isn't even going to get up to 80 from 75 unless you're spamming attacks nonstop. It's 89 times faster. Seriously, somebody's got to go to jail for that. Currently, you can gain the last 10 levels of restoration in 31 casts. 10 levels, 31 casts. Well, I guess that's 32 because you'd have to round up because it requires this 1,600 experience. Remember, look at that 1,600 number. We can make that a color to make it stand out. You're gaining 0.6 experience per blade swing. That's why that takes a long time to get there. It takes a very long time. Even doing that as a major skill and specializing in it, it's still going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of blade swings, where restoration, it doesn't matter. You don't have to do that. Who cares? It's going so fast. So, and this would be magic specialization. It's just this divided by my 53 per cast, 24 casts, and I'm gaining those last 10 levels. That's just stupid. Okay, next, Alchemy received massive buffs. So first, we don't need to read all these perks. Really, it's Journeyman and Beyond. Well, even Apprentice, but the main ones are Journeyman and Beyond. So Journeyman already had that you could recognize 3 alchemical properties of a substance, no change. And the new part is now you can handle 6 simultaneous effects. In Classic, you could only ever have 4 active potions at a time. Unless you did a little glitch, you could get a few extra. But if you just opened your menu, drank 4 potions that were Restore Magicka or Fortify Strength or Fortify Fatigue, which was ones I love to drink, that's all you get. Now, you could use hotkeys to get, I think, 4, and then open your menu to get 3 more, or something like that. Maybe it was 3 from hotkeys, 4 from your menus. I think it was 7 was the maximum you could get. Not that many. That exploit still exists where you can drink some from your hotkeys and then open up your menu and get a few more. But now the base number instead of being 4 is 6. I like this change a lot. I think that's a lot of fun, but it is really overpowered. What is bad is that Expert, you always craft 2 potions now. You have double the amount of potions, which you just didn't need. Alchemy was already really good. There's no reason to give you 2 potions. And then at Master, you can handle 10 simultaneous effects. So you can chug all the potions you need. So all this together is why it's a problem. So first, I like the simultaneous effect things. I think it's a good idea. It rewards you. If you go farm out a bunch of potions, you can become absurdly powerful for a little bit by just chugging all your potions. That's really cool. Honestly, though, it wouldn't be that OP if that was the case in Classic Oblivion, because in Classic Oblivion, you get half as many potions, first of all, and many ingredients had a 50 or 80% chance to harvest, which means you could fail. When you clicked on the item, it would say you failed to harvest this Cairn Belit cap or whatever it's called, this mushroom. So I found the average is a 71% chance to harvest the ingredients. So that means there's almost a 30% chance to get no ingredients when you try and get stuff. So I did some math at the bottom here. You're getting about 41% more ingredients in the remaster due to that fail chance. Minor skills level about 43% faster, which means if you have alchemy as a minor skill, it's leveling more than twice as fast as it did in Classic. And then you get that expert perk, so not only are you getting 41% more ingredients, you're getting double the amount of potions, which is 180% more potions than you were in Classic. It's more than double because you're getting double potions from every 2 ingredients, and you're getting 41% more ingredients. So it's just compounding on itself and making alchemy absurdly powerful. So you're getting almost 3 times as many potions as you did in Classic, and now instead of stacking 4, you can have 10 of them going at once. Literally, all of your player power could just come from this one skill now, and it doesn't even take that much to grind because you're doubling the amount of potions you get. And it's easier to get ingredients than ever. It's fucking stupid. It's absolutely moronic that all of this compounded together. You can't do all of these things together without totally throwing off the balance of the game. And now Alchemy, which was already overpowered, is now stupid levels of overpowered. And just it feels required if you want to play beyond Adept, you just use Alchemy and allow it to carry you. Last thing about Magic is we have the weakness problem. So currently, you can get 100% weakness to Shock and Magic for just 25.4 Magicka when you get 100 Destruction. Remember, 100 Destruction happens really fast. I know it's a typo. I'm not fixing it. We're going to leave it right now. It levels the same way as Restoration. It's just these 31 casts. So if you're fortifying your Destruction skill, after you get the Jonestone, you can enchant your skill to fortify your Destruction. I did that in Classic. I do it in the Remaster. It feels really good to cast high-level Destruction spells and not have them take a bunch of Magicka, even when you're low level. You can blow stuff up, but now your Destruction just naturally gets to 100 instantly. Way before Blade or Marksman or anything ever would. Even if you think, I don't like to use on-touch spells, remember, you can make this a target spell and it still only costs 38 as an on-target spell. That's for 10 seconds of weakness. This will quadruple any following shock damage, which is massive. If you're doing 50 damage with the shock spell after it, now it will do 200. If you have a 25 shock sigil stone, it's going to do 100 every swing after that. 100 damage every swing. Remember, this is kind of your max damage late game per swing, 33 from physical damage. You're doing 100 shock damage every swing, which is even more than a power attack. The only thing that beats it is if you have the master perk and you're getting 100% weakness. You're still getting 100% shock damage added, which would be there even if you had 0 blade skill and you were using a rusty iron dagger. Not only that, you can cast this same spell again. So you would spend this much Magicka, 25.4 times. You'd spend 50 Magicka, and now it's a times 9 multiplier. That 25 shock damage just became 225, blowing out anything you could do with physical damage, power attack or no. And that's every single swing. It could be with a dagger where you're doing 4 quick swings and you just blow up 1,000 damage. Now, I love the math behind weakness spells. I probably talked about this in 15 of my different videos. This is assuming you're alternating between 2 different spells. Even if you're just using one spell that you're casting over and over again, that multiplier at 1 cast is times 4, at 2 casts is times 9. You can keep casting that same spell, and this is the damage multiplier. So if we have a Shock Sigil Stone, well, that's 25 times this damage. Cast it 4 times, every swing's doing a bonus 600 damage. It's stupid powerful. And if you're willing to alternate damage between 2 different weakness spells and you're able to keep them up, well, that same Sigil Stone, and remember, I'm saying Sigil Stone and not a Grand Soul Gem enchant, which could do more damage because they have like 70 charges. So it's not even difficult to keep it charged up. It stays charged forever. It's convenient. That's the whole point of a Sigil Stone with elemental damage. They do less damage than you could with a Grand Soul Gem, but they last longer. And so this balance is just all out of whack. You're telling me after just casting 5 times, I can do 10,000 damage per swing? That's insane. Now, I love that this is in the game because the math is fun, but if they were going to rebalance anything, this is something that would have been very easy to rebalance. You could cap weakness and magic at 100%. You could increase the base cost of the spell. There's a lot of easy options they had, and they just didn't touch them. Due to this problem, all higher difficulty play, if you're playing on Master, you're either doing weakness stacking, poison damage, and summons. And the only reason poison damage and summons work is because they ignore the difficulty multipliers. Otherwise, you are using weakness. If you want to kill things instantly on Master, you use weakness stacking and poison damage. I think there's some guy named like Elusive on YouTube who's doing like this poison sneaky build. He just goes invisible, does some weakness spells, and then uses a custom poison. That's going to nuke everything on Master because poison ignores the difficulty, and weakness is the only way to do just insane damage in this game. So if you do poison and weakness, it doesn't matter what the difficulty multiplier is. It could be times 1,000. Poison ignores it. It's like you're playing on Adept again, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is really, really easy. The only guy I've ever seen play Master without these is Ice Coffee Gaming, and I remember watching a video of his where it took him over a minute to kill a single Zivali because he wasn't using like shock damage with weakness stacking. And while it was actually impressive, he was doing like radial canceling and all this other crazy stuff. I can kill a Zivali in 3 hits. I do 2 weakness spells and then 1 big shock damage spell or fire damage spell. It doesn't even matter. They have fire resist. It doesn't matter. It just, the game is so much easier if you're using weakness stacking, and physical damage shouldn't be that much weaker than magic. Okay, just to prove my point, I set it to Master, and these guys have 50% spell absorption. So sometimes the spell doesn't go through. But when it does, with some weakness stacking, I can still one-shot him. So weakness stacking is just insane. Now, the reason nobody talks about this problem is because the health pools of enemies were massively reduced. In fact, a Zivali, I thought, because the UESP says that they get 18 health per level, says it right there, 18 times your level minus 2, so a minimum of 360 health. I thought Zivali were buffed 50%. So I thought, looking at the health of all of these things, their health was reduced a lot, but in the remaster it was increased. I wasn't making a summoned one of these with 154 health. They all start with 154 health. Even if you go into an Oblivion Gate, this 360, I don't know who came up with this number. I never found this number. The number I found was they were gaining 7 health per level. So they started at 154. If you're level 24, so if I go to player level 24, they start with 154. If you go below that, well, they're still at 154. That's their minimum. And as you gain a bunch of levels, they gain a little bit of health. But Zivali didn't even have a ton of health in Classic Oblivion. In fact, they only gained 12 health per level in Classic. It actually was one of the ones that were scaled pretty decently. Zivali felt reasonable in Classic, and they lowered that to 7 health per level. The ones that were a big problem was Goblin Warlord. In Classic, they gained 30 health per level, which was stupid. It was absurd. And now they only gain 12. Honestly, that was a great change. Goblin Warlords did not need to gain 30 health per level. I went and tested a couple extra too, some of the monsters. The Minotaur got a big hit. They're only at 36% health of what they were in Classic. They went from 300 to 108. The Minotaur Lords weren't hit as bad. Minotaur Lords are at 41% health. Still a lot lower though. So the point is, Adept is much, much easier. Oh, and the reason I highlighted this Ogre formula is because I couldn't find the exact formula that always lined up at any level, but they went from gaining 26 health a level to gaining either 10 or 11 health every level. So I said times 10.5, but that didn't quite line up. So whatever, the formula doesn't exactly matter. I'm off by like 1 on different levels. I can't figure it out. Not a big deal. Point is, ogres have about 40-ish% of how much health they did. They also have a lot less health than they did in Classic. Now, the fact is, people complained about damage sponges in Classic, and I don't blame them. I agree. I think a lot of these did need to have their health reduced. But I'm going to talk about more about the specifics that I think should have happened in these fixes. So the only enemies that I think needed the change were the top tier enemies. Talking about Goblin Warlords, Minotaur Lords. These Wraiths shouldn't have 400 health. That was ridiculous. Some of the other ones I don't think really needed a change. The Scamps didn't need to go down to 40 health. Flame Atronachs I think were scary and a difficult opponent. They cut their health in half, and now it doesn't feel that way. A Clanfear, they cut their health in half as well, and they reduced their damage from 36 to 20. And they're just not as scary as they were. In the next section, I'm going to talk about changes that I would make. Now, these aren't that important, and honestly, I don't expect a modder to necessarily pick them up and take them. But really, what I want to highlight is that I'm one guy, some solo dude who has a full-time job. I have 3 young kids. You might hear them screaming in the background. And I'm able to come up with a system that's more balanced than Virtuous Studios was able to do. The fact is they took systems and they completely overhauled them. All of the attributes are different. The skills level up differently. Enemy health is different. They completely rebalanced the game, and they did a terrible, terrible job. So I'm going to suggest a handful of fixes that I think, when taken all together, would work in a far more balanced game. If they really wanted to rebalance the game, the key things they have to look at is they have to buff physical damage, which they did with Marksman, but for some reason didn't do with the weapons that they cut their speed in half. And they need to keep weakness spells manageable. They should still be good and powerful, but it shouldn't just be something that totally breaks the game. If they're focused on rebalancing the game, something they could do is add in a way for physical damage to continue to scale. I like that they added a way for magic skills to gain more experience if you cast more expensive spells, but they shouldn't gain so much experience where you're gaining 100 destruction in 30 minutes of gameplay from 90. That's just too fast. If it goes that fast, then it should be that fast when you're leveling other skills like Blade. Magic skills, there's very easy fixes that they could do to balance this and make it feel appropriate. So that's what I'm going to talk about, things that if they had tested their game at all, they would have done. And honestly, I've talked about some of these changes myself in the past. I made this video here the day before the remaster came out, and I was talking about how I think they should change the physical damage of certain weapons. You know, take a longsword, Perfect Amber should do 37 instead of 25, like a 50% increase. And this was assuming, because I hadn't seen the remaster yet, this was assuming that they had the same weapon speed. I thought this would have been decent balance. So I'm going to talk about, with all the changes that they made in mind, what changes I would make that I think could balance this game out. And I think if they had put any effort into actually making a decently balanced game, not perfect, it's a single player game. You should never have a perfectly balanced single player game, but any effort whatsoever, these are the changes I would have made, and I think they would have made a much better game. Well, first, we can fix fatigue. Damage should always continue to improve. Now, a lot of people think that that should happen by allowing you to continually increase your strength or blade skill. In fact, I've seen a lot of mods that do that. Let me show you something. So if I increase my strength, this formula, I didn't max it out as if strength maxes out at 100. I just don't ever type in anything over 100. But the fact is, if I have 50 blade skill, I would be able to cast 6 or 7 or 8 spells that I can chain on myself, let's say 7, to gain 700 blade skill. To keep my magicka up, I would just chug Restore Magicka potions. And so the best warrior possible would just be one who chugs Restore Magicka potions and casts Fortify blade spells, maybe Fortify strength as well. Because you see this 18 damage, I could get up to 220 damage per swing. Maybe I throw in a couple Fortify strength spells to get 300, and I'm doing 400 damage per swing with 1,000 power attacks. Not because I naturally got my blade to 100 by playing a warrior and picking all the best warrior stats and really focusing on being a warrior, but because I picked full mage with 100% spell effectiveness who mastered alchemy and restoration. That's my problem with this. This is by far the most powerful warrior if you just uncap strength and blade. I don't believe that's a good solution, and a lot of people mod it or suggest you do that. I think that I would just break the game. Mage would be the best. Mage would even be the best warrior. In Classic, your current fatigue is ignored. It looks at your ratio of fatigue, the current divided by the maximum. I think your max fatigue should be ignored and only your current fatigue should be looked at, and that would solve the problem of people damaging their own attributes to get a low max fatigue. For example, what I did in that video where I got 1 max fatigue and I could do like 20,000 damage. So this formula here was the original fatigue formula. You take your percent fatigue divided by 100 plus 1. So if I'm at 100%, it's 1 plus 1 divided by 2. And so as that percent goes up, your damage goes up. Well, I would change that to be your current fatigue. Instead of divided by 100, because we're not talking about a percent anymore, we divide it by 300, because I think that should be kind of your base starting point. After you get above 300 fatigue, your damage should increase. Now, because this has this max in here, which I'm some random public school teacher on Google Sheets, Virtuous Studios should absolutely have been able to add a maximum thing here, and I know they are. At 0 fatigue, it should still be a 1 times damage multiplier. It doesn't matter. And at 300, it should still be a 1. But as I get above that, for example, at 100 willpower and 100 agility, you have 400 fatigue. It should slowly increase your damage multiplier. And if I'm able to pump lots of fortify fatigue spells, let's say I could pump 6 into myself, well, that would gain me double damage. Now, this has the benefit of, unlike fortifying my blade a whole bunch, where that just gets me insane damage, this actually, if I have low blade skill, I don't over repair my gear, maybe I didn't even cap out my strength, and I'm able to fortify my fatigue to 1,000, that's still only 22 damage. Even if I can get up to 1,500 fatigue. This is like a normal warrior's damage. This only becomes really useful if you're also a really good warrior who's capping out your strength, your blade, and maybe using the best damage weapons in the game. I'm also going to later talk about how I think base weapon damage should be increased, but really pumping potions and spells into your fortify fatigue is only going to get you at about a most a ×3, maybe ×4 multiplier if you're really pushing with a lot of potions and a lot of spells, which is good. It will feel good to be able to power attack for 400 damage because you're the best warrior in the game who's also using a ton of potions and a ton of spells to really push your damage to its limits. Because right now, nothing's ever doing more than this. This is it. That's the cap, and you're done. So it'd be nice to have a tertiary stat, like a third stat. You have your primary stat, your skill, your secondary stat, your attribute, because that increases your damage 1/3 as much as blade does. And then your third stat is your fatigue. Get your fatigue up, and it's even one more way to continue to increase your damage that doesn't limit itself to 100. It doesn't cap, it keeps going. But you need to get these warrior stats up there first, and you're not able to just fortify these to Kingdom Come and get absurd damage just as a mage who's just putting all your points into blade. Next, the remaster removed staggering. Now, this is sort of a nice change because you shouldn't get staggered when you attack. In Classic, when you attack something else, you would get staggered all the time, and it was very annoying. However, when you hit enemies and enemies hit you, there should be some staggering that happens, and it should be based on a formula on physical damage dealt. So maybe here's an example one. Maybe it caps at 20%, but if you hit an enemy for 1, it's got like a 2% chance to stagger them. So when you're hitting crazy hard late game, 1/5 of attacks would be staggering an enemy, which would be really nice. However, this would be after reductions from armor. So if an enemy attacks you and they deal 100 damage, well, that doesn't mean you're going to get staggered 14% of the time. If you have 85% armor, you're only taking 15 damage. And that's your stagger chance. And just like in Classic, I don't think that this should be affected by difficulty. So for example, on Master, the stagger chance shouldn't be greatly increased. The stagger chance should just be based on the base damage dealt and that you're dealing. And so it's not like on Master you could never stagger everything and everything would always stagger you. This would ignore difficulty multipliers just like it did in Classic. But it would give you a benefit to dealing more physical damage. And right now, there's no reason not to use a rusty iron weapon with a powerful enchant. It will ultimately do the same damage as a Daedric weapon. Okay, next, the perks. The perks are boring. Bleed is awesome, but bleed is just damage. And so there is no difference between level 1 character and a high level 30 character other than damage. There will be more damage dealt, but it won't feel any different. So I'm going to show, right now I have 25 blade skill, which is what I would start with, and I set my strength to 50, so my iron claymore does 4 damage. But even with this low skill, the game does not feel any different. I still have the same animations that I would always have. The enemy still has pretty much no reaction. Let's quick lower this to Apprentice so I don't instantly die. And it's just not that effective. Sorry, it's not even about the damage. That's not what I was talking about. The game does not feel any different than it will now. I will show you with the Daedric stuff. So now I have 100 blade skill, 100 strength, and I'm using the Daedric Claymore, and I have the same animations. And yes, it's doing more damage, so let's raise up the difficulty. That was kind of the point. But it's still not staggering him. It's still not knocking him back. It doesn't attack any faster. I don't have new animations. There's nothing different about the flow of combat here. Other than the damage number is higher, my power attack applies a weakness to him, which makes my damage number higher. And the bleed hits him, which makes my damage number higher. But other than that, I'm not gaining anything from my blade skill. If that's the case, at least can we do a lot of damage? I think the Journeyman perk should be 30% for 10 seconds, because 5 seconds is too short and 15% is too little to feel. And the Master perk should go up to 50% for 15 seconds. It's still not that amazing. It's 1.5 times damage. It's good, but this is not game breaking. It's just not. You're right now, if this perk was added and that was it, even at 100%, it still would not be enough to be meaningful. You just wouldn't really feel it. You'd kill a Zivalion Master in 30 seconds. It's just, it would not compete with weakness spells still. Next, Blunt. Instead of shield, let's have a better stagger mechanic. You know, right now, what I said was at 150 damage, you have a 20% stagger chance. Just increase that by 50%. Maybe it caps now at 30% instead of 20. And the Master perk, instead of increasing that, maybe I have a chance to knock down. You know, it doesn't matter what the knockdown is. Maybe it's only, 10% chance on power attacks to knock down. Maybe 15%. I don't care. Kind of Marksman has that with Paralyze, but Blunt, the idea should be I hit him in the head really hard and knocks him on the ground. That's a crowd control. So I'm staggering more and I'm knocking him down. The silence is cool too. I like the silence. You can keep that. That's fine because it is crowd control. So maybe the blade would be the higher DPS and the blunt would be more damage. But shield is not crowd control. And shield, it just doesn't function properly in terms of gameplay. And it feels weird thematically that I'm hitting someone and I get a purple magical shield. It just doesn't work for me. So it should be stagger or knockdown or even paralyze. Something along those lines. That's what blunt should be. Okay, we got to talk about base damage. If the speed of weapons is not changed, two-handers just need massive damage increases. Now, I think early game, things actually feel fine. Physical damage isn't bad early game. Even on higher difficulties, it should kind of be bad on higher difficulties, just like magic is bad at early game. But as I get to Daedric gear, it should feel more powerful. Those gaps should be larger. And I actually, here, let's just listen to me talk about that from a video I made in January. Damage of these numbers here should be increased a little bit. Maybe not the early game ones, but a Daedric longsword base damage should be like 30. This should be like 27, 24, 21. Those jumps should be bigger as you get better gear. In my opinion, if they're going to do any balancing changes, I think the base damage of weapons should be moderately increased, especially blunt weapons. They should be better because they're slower. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. I also want you to notice this was before the days where I edited videos. These were great times, better days. Just had to talk about that real quickly. Okay, and two-handers, if they get a speed buff instead, which they should have. If that was the case, instead of making them absurdly slow, they didn't do that and they kept it like classic. Obviously, these numbers would be too high, in my opinion. I think something like 37 for a Daedric Claymore instead of 45, like it's just 8 lower. About 2 or 4 higher than the one-handed version, somewhere in that range. Right now, with how slow they are, they need to be way higher to feel valid. Okay, how to fix magic spells? Well, lower the number. I don't know why the fuck this is complicated. They should not gain that much experience per cast. Right now, it's this formula, and the plus 0.015 changes based on the school. Sure, this 3 that I'm suggesting it changes to could be 2 on one school, it could be 4 or 5 on another. I don't think it should get higher than 6. That would kind of be too powerful. This would become this number. Remember, it was over 50 in the other one. So with this formula here, it's over 50 experience per cast compared to 0.6 per blade swing. Totally fucked up. I'm going to use a graph to help highlight my point. So this red bar represents how much magicka you need to spend at any given skill level to increase your skill level. So for example, if you're at 99 skill, you need to spend about 2,200 magicka. Now there is, your formula for gaining experience is like y equals mx plus b. This is ignoring the b. If I'm looking at that spreadsheet again, this is ignoring that plus 0.15. It's just talking about the 4/30ths part in this graph. Ignoring that, you need to spend a couple thousand experience in these later levels. But remember, you can spend up to 400 magicka in a single cast. And that's because of your skill multiplier. At 100 skill, that 400 magicka actually only costs you 80 magicka. So it's pretty easy to spend that, to cast that spell 5 times and gain this level. With my suggested changes, we get this blue line. Now, to get from 99 to 100, you would need to spend 12,000 magicka, base magicka cost. And you might think, oh, that's a ton. If I'm only spending 400, I got to cast that many spells. But this is, remember, I increased that 0.15 bonus per cast to about 3 per cast. So spending cheap spells would still gain your experience much slower, but you wouldn't be gaining levels in just 4 or 5 casts at the late game. So most of it would still feel about the same, except those last 20 levels wouldn't be absurdly fast because of your high magicka spending. If the devs wanted all skills to generally to level faster, then I think they should increase the rate that all skills increase, not just magic ones. Weapon skills should not be 200 times slower than magic skills at any point. And also in my opinion, I think major skills should be more impactful. Right now, they level a little bit faster than minor skills. It goes from the experience needed, this here required, goes from, so this is like the default experience needed. So we'll call this minor, default. So a major skill requires this much. That difference is not that big. But what it should be instead is this times like 0.5 or 0.6, something like that. And that way it would be dramatically different from a minor. You would feel that your major skills level much faster, and you could even see going from 128 to 73 casts, that's noticeable. You feel that. Going from 128 to 110, like what the heck? Do you even notice? I don't think you really do. Major skills right now, just the difference is not high enough. It's just stupid. Even if this 0.5 instead was 0.6, I think it would still be good. There's some wiggle room there, but major skills should level faster. So this 12.95 is much lower than 53 experience per cast. It's still pretty high. It should go a little faster, I think, than it did in Classic. And it's nice that it speeds up a little bit late game. But the fact is you're not going to be casting spells that cost 400 every time. Most of my spells that I spam cost 150 because at 100 skill, this would cost 30. This would cost 30 magicka for me. And it would be gaining 6.75 per cast. That's not that insane. And if you're only casting a cheap spell, it's just not gaining that much experience. In Classic Oblivion, they gain from like 3 to 6 experience. So gaining 4, 5, 6 for these spells is totally reasonable. And it's not unless you are really pushing your character to the limit that you're gaining more skills. It's still, this is 4 times slower than what it currently is in the remaster. I think weapon skills too could gain like a 50% maybe or more, like a double experience buff just to balance things out. 0.6 with their slow attack speed, they needed a higher buff to their experience gain. I think looking at like 1.2 would be a lot better than 0.6. It still feel like blade levels kind of slowly in comparison to even this slowed down destruction and restoration. Okay, alchemy, I think the potion limit increase, it's awesome. It's just combined with unlimited potions, it's not good. Remove the double perk, the double potion perk. You don't need double potions. That should have never happened. That was a bad idea. Virtuous Studios didn't think that through. It was stupid. I forgot to mention, they also, because you get more ingredients, they could lower the XP per potion from 5 to 3. And they have that minor skill increase. Minor skills increase a lot faster. So for those two reasons, I think the base experience per potion could be a little lower. I think a lot of people notice alchemy levels very quickly. It did in Classic, and I think that's okay. So maybe only lowering it to 4 would be reasonable as well. But I think leaving it at 5, it's very frequently the first skill to 100 for a lot of players, even if you're not just going to Skingrad farms and being, a weirdo who just farms all day instead of actually playing the game. The weakness solution, they probably didn't even know what weakness stacking was when they made this game. With that said, weakness to element and poison, the base cost should increase 50% from 0.1 to 0.5, and weakness to magic should be 0.6. It should be an expensive spell. It should not be easy to give someone 100% weakness to magic, so it should go up 140%. That means this spell would cost 54.5 that we talked about before. If you want to do a target spell that quadruples your damage, well, it costs over 80 magicka now. Now, this is still absurdly broken and powerful, but buffs to physical damage that I talked about, it won't be the only valid way to play. In fact, if I was using a Daedric longsword with a base damage of 33, I could do decent damage. And if I could buff my fatigue to 600, I could do 59 damage a swing. And my power attacks could be doing 150. I could actually do real physical damage. And with those super slow claymores, I could be doing really big damage. Though obviously they're so slow, so it just take too long. And maybe with that weakness, it would be this times 1.5. I could be doing over 126 damage per attack. I could be doing 300 damage power attacks. It's a lot of damage. But if you have a master perk, you're using magic to buff your fatigue, you have the best equipment in the game, physical damage should be powerful. But with that said, if physical damage is doing that much power, and weakness got nerfed, and your skills are gaining experience slower, and physical damage skills are gaining their experience faster, I think a good way to fix that too is lower the base cost of Fire, Frost, Shock, and damage spells. It doesn't need to be lower that much, but I think these numbers here would be pretty reasonable. Right now, 20 fire damage for 3 seconds on touch is about 21 damage. This would lower it to 21 magicka. This would lower it to about 17. That's because without weakness, destruction isn't actually that broken. It feels pretty balanced. The problem is weakness is a destruction spell, and it does buff all destruction spells. So you have weakness to fire, you have weakness to magic, and that quadruples that damage. So this spell, which right now costs 21 magicka on touch, that's not a lot, does 60 damage. And if you hit him with a weakness spell first, it's going to do times 4, 240 damage. If you hit him with 2 weakness spells first, it does times 9, 540 damage. We're getting to absurd numbers. And that's why these need to be in the hundreds as well, because it should compete with that. It should be comparable. But again, now that weakness is more expensive, you're not going to be able to spam that and then follow up with this. It wouldn't be game breaking, but it'd keep destruction powerful to keep up with that physical damage. So now we've talked about, we've buffed our physical damage a bunch, and we've buffed our destruction damage a little bit without weakness stacking. So if we're doing that, we got to buff the damage of enemies. It's just the way it is. I think just across the board, enemies should get about a 50% health increase. These numbers, if you look at the blue column, that's the numbers I'm suggesting. Buffing their health 50%, it is still much lower than the yellow column, which is what Classic Oblivion was on the middle difficulty. So I do think damage sponges was a problem. The solution was not to just reduce everything's health dramatically. It would be to buff physical damage done. I've talked about it in a lot of my old videos. Physical damage was too low. What needed to be fixed was Goblin Warlords had bad scaling, Wraiths were too powerful, and physical damage was too low. So they made physical damage weaker and then made every enemy super weak. With the new physical damage formula changes compared to the old, this current hits to kill, these numbers are still pretty similar. So on Adept, it wouldn't feel that different because physical damage would be higher, especially late game. Early game on Adept, it would feel a little bit harder. Because if we look at early game, if I change these numbers to represent what your character would be like at the beginning of a game, you do the same damage. Remember, when I was talking about those weapon fixes, the iron should not do any more or less damage. It should be the same. But now, your things are going to take about twice as many hits. Because right now, Adept early game is so stupidly easy. And late game, it's still pretty easy, but this would at least, and this wouldn't really change that. Late game, it would still feel about the same easiness late game because you'd be doing more damage, but enemies would have more health. And so you'd be required, if you're not fortifying your fatigue, late game, it won't feel that much easier. Where a player who knows what they're doing, who understands the mechanics of the game, who knows how weakness works, who knows how fortify fatigue works, will completely face roll Adept, and it will be a joke, and they'll want to move to Expert or Master to have a good time. Where currently, there are so many players who face roll Adept, and they have no way to move to Expert. It's way too difficult. These balance changes would completely fix that problem. Now, this is a ton of balance changes, and I don't even think somebody would want to do this in a mod because what a headache. The fact is, Virtuous Studios should have done all this. These were very obvious problems from the get-go. Anyone looking at this game, if they played it a little bit, it should have been very obvious that Adept is stupidly easy. Not to mention, they should have just copied these multipliers from Skyrim. It's absolutely absurd that Expert in Oblivion, which is just one bump up from Adept, it has higher multipliers than Legendary in Skyrim. Expert has a times 3.5 damage taken, and while player damage dealt is slightly higher on Expert than it is in Legendary and Skyrim, I mean, 1 over 3.5 is 0.285. It's almost the same as Legendary. And so Legendary is very comparable to Expert. They should have these multipliers in between so the players can feel that there's a gradual increase in difficulty, and you can kind of pick the one that matches your playstyle. If they wanted to just have Expert and Master and then add in Legendary, that's the divided by 6 times 6 to keep that crazy high difficulty, I think that would be fine as well. All right, that's all I got. Thanks for watching.